For starters, back in 2023, so just last year, 3 military veterans testified in Congress's highly anticipated hearing on UFOs, including a former Air Force intelligence officer who claimed the US government had operated a secret, multi-decade reverse engineering program of recovered vessels. He also mentioned that the US had recovered non-human biologics from alleged crash sites. Mainly there were calls to remove the stigma for aviators who report UFO sightings and to ensure oversight of government programs that investigate them. Retired Major David Grush, who went from being a part of the Pentagon's UAP, another word for UFO, task force to becoming a whistleblower, told the House Oversight Committee's National Security Subcommittee that he had been denied access to some government UFO programs, but that he knows the exact locations of those that are in the US possession. In response to public interest and political pressure, federal and military agencies have shared a trove of information about unexplained aircraft encounters. Grush also alleged that the US has retrieved, like I said before, non-human biological matter from the pilots of the crafts, adding that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program that he talked to, that are currently still on the program. While he refrained from sharing any further information in the public hearing, he did offer to disclose details behind closed doors. He said he hasn't personally seen any alien vehicles or bodies, but his opinions are based on the accounts of over 40 witnesses he interviewed over 4 years in his role with the task force. He's like, look, my testimony is based on information I've been given by folks with a long-standing track record of legitimacy and service to the country. A lot of them who shared compelling evidence in the form of photography, official documentation, and classified testimony. He also mentioned that that trove of evidence has intentionally been kept secret from Congress. He mentioned to the panel that he and not one, not two, but several other colleagues have been the targets of administrative hell, and that he's feared for his life since coming forward. He's just like, it's brutal, it's very unfortunate, and a lot of the tactics used to hurt him professionally and personally kinda sucked. Now, there is an open investigation into the matter. The subcommittee also heard testimony from former Navy fighter pilot Ryan Graves and retired Commander David Fravor about their alleged encounters with aircrafts of an unknown origin. Graves recounted an incident with a flying object off of the coast of Virginia Beach in 2014. While flying an F-18, he said he came upon an aircraft that looked like a dark gray or black cube inside of a clear sphere that he estimated to be 5 to 15 feet in diameter and unlike anything he's ever seen. He claimed that this UFO could remain stationary despite hurricane force winds. He told folks that his squadron submitted a safety report, but they got no official acknowledgement of the incident. Also, according to him, UFO encounters in that region weren't exactly rare or isolated. Now, he has since founded Americans for Safe Aerospace, a group that supports aviators who have reported UFOs. He said that the objects that are reportedly being seen by military and commercial pilots are performing maneuvers that are unexplainable due to our current understanding of our technology and our capabilities. He's like, if everybody could see what he saw, our national conversation would change. Project Magnet was a UFO study program established by Transport Canada in December of 1950 under the direction of Wilbert Brockhouse-Smith, senior radio engineer for Transport Canada's Broadcast and Measurement section. He made a request to use the facilities of the Department of Transport to study UFOs, and it was formally approved on December 2nd of 1950 with the intention to collect data about UFOs and apply any recovered data to practical engineering and technology. The ultimate goal of the project was to apply any findings on the subject of geomagnetism to the possibility of exploiting Earth's magnetic field as a source of propulsion for vehicles. Now, he and his colleagues and the government believed that UFOs might hold a key to this new source of power, which, it was a small-scale undertaking. It used those facilities, and it did have some assistance from personnel at the Defense Research Board and the National Research Council. In June of 1952, Smith issued a preliminary report arguing that UFOs likely came from intelligent extraterrestrial sources and almost certainly manipulated magnetism for flight. And he reiterated it again in a report in 1953. Also back to 1952, I think it was April, the Canadian government established Project Second Story, a parallel UFO research project with Smith also involved. Now, this consisted of a group of scientists and military officers who met periodically to consider the UFO question and to recommend government action. Smith reported to Second Story on some of Project Magnet's findings and conclusions. He believed that UFOs were linked to psychic phenomena and believed himself to be in contact with extraterrestrial beings who communicated with him through telepathy, which not uncommon for aliens. He wrote a number of articles for Topside, the publication of the Ottawa New Sciences Club, which he founded, outlining the philosophy of the Space Brothers. These are the folks who we claim to be in contact with. They were later collected and they were published posthumously in 1969 under the title The Boys from Topside. Now, back to 1952, in October, Smith set up an observatory at Shirley's Bay outside of Ottawa to study reports of UFO sightings, believing that UFOs would emit physical characteristics that could be measured. A number of sighting reports were investigated by Project Magnet, but in 1954 the project was shut down. But Smith was allowed to use the facilities with his own funding and did so until he passed in 1962. Sean Kirkpatrick is a physicist and former intelligence intelligence official who, until last December, headed the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. You know, the Pentagon office that Congress was like, you, find me answers. He recently published an op-ed in Scientific American called "Here's What I Learned as the US Government's UFO Hunter." So, I'd consider that a pretty good thing to read. He mentioned on a podcast that Congress really gave the office two main missions. There was an operational mission, which was to investigate contemporary sightings with military pilots, operators, and sensors to kind of understand what's happening in our domain. And the second was a historical mission, which was to look at everything the United States government has done on aliens, UFOs. We're talking going back to 1945, as well as investigate all these hidden programs that the government's been keeping from Congress. All the ones that investigate UFOs or reverse engineer things. Yeah, let's look into that. So in that historical mission, anybody who had previously signed non-disclosure agreements that protected classified information, they were allowed to come in if they thought they had something that was helpful. Why? Well, to tell the office, so the office could investigate. The group had access to the National Archives, they had all military service archives, they had crazy stuff, all the NASA stuff. They would go so far back and be like, hey, you named something? Yeah, what was that? What was it? How did that relate to this? Document everything, track it down. So, obviously, a lot of programs got named, and they're all classified, but apparently the guys working on this, they found everything, reported it all back up to Congress, so when are we getting those details? Please? We all know the Roswell hullabaloo, but if we break down all the government coverage about that chaos, it proves they're hiding something. So, a report released in 1994 concluded that the material recovered in 1947 was likely, keyword here, debris from Project Mogul, a military surveillance program employing high-altitude balloons and classified portions of an unclassified New York University project by atmospheric researchers. A scholarly consensus emerged concluding that the military had decided to conceal the true purpose of the crash device, which was allegedly nuclear test monitoring. And instead they're like, hey everybody, it's a weather balloon. Now this balloon had allegedly been launched from a different Army airfield a month earlier, and it was carrying a radar reflector and classified sensors for experimental monitoring of testing. Now, these Air Force reports were dismissed by experts because it's kind of implausible. Now look, at the end of the day, let's try and count how many times the government changed their tale. And they expected us to believe them every time? Because for me, it screams scrambling to cover up aliens. Okay, I know, you need more information. Well, how about this? Let's consult Edgar Mitchell. An Apollo astronaut passed away in 2018, and he had a lot of theories about aliens that he shared with the public. He believed they were very much real, and that UFOs have visited us before, publicly stating that he thought there was a cover-up involving aliens and their visits to Earth. As the sixth man to walk on the moon and a NASA astronaut, his theories and beliefs are among the most credible of UFO believers. So when he started speaking out in the 90s, he said, "I'm only coming out now with this knowledge because I don't want to be labeled a UFO crank." But he stood by his beliefs no matter how much he was criticized. In an interview in 1996, he said there were alien bodies at Roswell, but the government covered it up. In 1998, he called on Washington, D.C. to acknowledge publicly what it knew about alien life. He said he had witnesses he knew personally from intelligence agencies and the military who convinced him the government had been covering up UFOs for 50 years, including Roswell. 2008, he was interviewed and he talked about how this was real and aliens have contacted humans multiple times. Now, interestingly, his beliefs were in line with those of Philip James Corso, who was chief of U.S. Counterintelligence Corps in Rome in the 1940s and the Pentagon's Foreign Technology Desk in the 60s, who wrote a book the day after Roswell, where he also said that he moved alien artifacts from the Roswell crash, which were later reverse engineered to develop more of our advanced technology. Look, I could go on and on for ages. And finally, today, J. Allen Hynek was initially a skeptic of flying saucers and came to believe over the course of the top secret project that he was on that serious investigation of UFOs was a legitimate scientific endeavor. He acted as scientific advisor to UFO studies undertaken by the US Air Force under 3 projects: Project Sign, Project Grudge, and the very famous Project Blue Book. He studied UFO reports and decided whether the phenomena described therein suggested known astronomical projects. So when he was originally hired, he was skeptical. He was like, okay, all these reports are made by unreliable witnesses, or you've misidentified something that already exists. He's like, oh, it's all ridiculous, and it's a fad that's gonna pass. So let's just fast forward a little bit. 1953, he's now an associate member of the Robertson panel, which concluded that, well, I don't know, maybe we should take a PR campaign to debunk the subject. He would later, regret his decision because apparently that panel helped make UFOs a disreputable field of study. So let's fast forward. 1969, Project Blue Book is shuttered, and Hynek was one of the few people who conceded that some UFO cases could simply defy explanation. So today he's known as the father of ufology, who coined the phrase close encounter. Now, 1985, people are like, okay, like, it was an interview, they were asking him, why'd you change your mind? He's like, well, there was two things. One was the completely negative and unyielding attitude of the Air Force, because they wouldn't give UFOs the chance of existing, even if they were flying up and down the street in broad daylight. He began to resent the whole everything had to have an explanation, because at first he was like, okay, yeah, but then he's like, no, you can't assume everything's just the way it is. Also, the caliber of witnesses was troubling him. A lot of them were military pilots, and he's like, maybe there is something to all this after all. Number 5, Betty and Barney Hill. Well, it only makes sense to start off today with the most obvious answer. The Hills were a married couple that lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. The UFO sighting happened at around 10:30 p.m. on September 19th of 1961, when the duo were driving back to their home in Portsmouth from a vacation in Niagara Falls and Montreal. Welcome to Canada. Just south of Lancaster, Betty noticed a bright point of light in the sky that moved from below the moon and the planet Jupiter upwards to the west of the moon. While Barney was driving, Betty reasoned that she was observing a falling star. Only, it was moving up. Because it moved erratically and grew bigger and brighter, Betty convinced Barney to stop the car for a closer look. Barney obliged and stopped at a picnic area just south of Twin Mountain. By this point, Betty had dug out her binoculars for a closer look and described seeing an odd-shaped aircraft flashing multicolored lights travel across the face of the moon, believing it to be a flying saucer based off of stories she'd heard from her sister. The Hills said they continued driving on the isolated road, moving very slowly in order to observe the object as it came even closer. At one point, the object passed above a restaurant and signal tower on top of Cannon Mountain and came out near the Old Man of the Mountain. Betty later testified that it was at least 1.5 times the length of the granite cliff profile, which was 40 feet long, and that it seemed to be rotating. At one point, the object descended rapidly towards her vehicle, causing Barney to stop in the middle of the highway. The huge silent craft hovered about 80 to 100 feet above the Hills' 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air and filled the entire field of view in the windshield. Carrying his pistol in his pocket, Barney stepped away from the vehicle and moved closer to said object, which he later said was roughly the size of a huge pancake. And that statement right there just made me hungry. Still using the binoculars, Barney claimed to have seen 8 to 11 humanoid figures peering out of the craft's windows, seeming to look at him. In his report to investigator Walter Webb of the National Investigations Community on Aerial Phenomena, NICAP, Barney described specifically that the beings were somehow not human. In unison, all but one figure moved to what appeared to be a panel on the rear wall of the hallway that encircled the front portion of the craft, kind of like a patio. The one remaining figure continued to look at Barney and communicated a message telling him to stay where you are and keep looking. Barney had a recollection of observing the humanoid forms wearing glossy black uniforms and black caps. Red lights on what appeared to be batwing fins began to telescope out of the sides of the craft, and a long structure descended from the bottom of the craft. The silent aircraft approached what Barney estimated was within 50 to 80 feet overhead and 300 feet away from him. Not arriving home till dawn, the Hills stated that they had some odd sensations and impulses they couldn't explain. Now, if you're wondering what happened next, don't worry, so were they. They tried to reconstruct what exactly happened the night before, but their memories were incomplete and fragmented. After sleeping for a couple of hours, Betty awoke and placed her shoes and clothing that she'd worn during the drive into her closet, observing that the dress was torn at the hem, zipper, and lining, and later noticed a pinkish powder on said dress. Over the years, 5 different laboratories have conducted chemical and forensic analyses on the dress, and they got nothing. This wasn't the only damage to items in their possession. Barney said that the leather strap for the binoculars was torn, but didn't remember how. The toes of his shoes were scraped, and their watches were broken, and no matter what, they never worked again. There were shiny concentric circles, similar to the rings you would find on a tree trunk, on their car's trunk that had not been there the previous day. Betty and Barney experimented with a compass, noting that when they moved it close to the spots, the needle would whirl rapidly. But when they moved it a few inches away from the shiny spots, it would drop down. So 10 days after the UFO encounter, Betty began having a series of vivid dreams, which continued for 5 successive nights. She stated that she experienced them with a degree of detail and intensity that she had never had before. After the 5th night, the dream stopped and never recurred, but they occupied her thoughts during the day. Determined to recover their lost memories, the Hills opted to partake in hypnosis sessions. Barney recalled driving the car away from the UFO, but afterwards he felt compelled to pull off the road and drive into the woods, eventually spotting 6 men standing on the dirt road. The car stalled and 3 of the men approached the car, telling Barney, "Don't fear us." He was still anxious, however, and he reported that the leader told him to close his eyes. While hypnotized, Barney said, "I feel like the eyes had pushed into my eyes," a statement he would repeat each session. The best anyone has been able to rebut what happened was claiming sleep deprivation as the cause of what they saw and experienced. Oh, and by the way, when she was still recollecting everything, Betty was able to write out an entire star system that wouldn't be discovered for another 40 plus years. Mind-boggling. I'll admit, I'm usually much more of a skeptic, but this seems pretty dang real to me. Number 4. A great alien abduction. Grant Rollins, a resident of suburban Maryland, described himself as a fairly normal bachelor, living in peace until this all went down in December of 2017. He woke up at 1:30 in the morning to the sound of a break-in and went to the bedroom door to confront the intruder, but was suddenly rendered unconscious as he touched the doorknob. He woke up naked and cold in a pill-shaped glass container. The lid was open, so he was able to stumble out onto the floor around said container, and described feeling sluggish and barely able to walk, but he thought he'd been kidnapped, so he was urgently trying to find an escape route. The room he was in was made of mostly concrete and plastic with fluorescent lights. He managed to limp into a hallway that was tunnel-shaped and followed a blue glow coming from down said hall. As he walked, he came out of the tunnel and entered a large cylindrical room lined with vehicles on hooks along the walls. They were human vehicles, mostly Japanese and German cars and motorcycles, but some vehicles were clearly from the American military. In the center of the room was what looked like a metal tree that was 6 stories tall with glowing blue leaves. As Grant stumbled closer, he realized the tree was actually a large metal cylinder, and the leaves were capsules similar to the one he'd woken up in, except these still had people inside them and were radiating a neon blue glow. As he paid more attention to higher up in this tree, Grant noticed some blue wires moving about in the dark areas towards the ceiling. These clumps of wires suddenly floated down towards him and turned to reveal that they had faces in them, each with 2 large dark eyes and narrow slits for noses and mouths. He's compared them in appearance to the typical gray alien face from popular media, with 2 of the faces frowning and 1 smiling. Grant passed out once again, waking up later face down in a puddle of his own drool on a glass floor. He was too tired to get up and was barely able to tilt his head up just enough to take a look around. The room was circular, about 150 square feet in size, and a bright, sterile white color. One of the tentacled creatures was in the room, but was busy facing away and operating a set of strange controls with no buttons or levers. Out of exhaustion, Grant's head fell back down, and through the glass floor saw that they had risen out of a deep black hole that was dug into a grassy plain, where a rock-shaped lid closed around the hole to cover it. This is when he realized he was in a spacecraft, and had actually been in a silo of some sort that's here on Earth somewhere. Grant passed out for the last time and was awoken by the sensation of being dropped back into his bed with a hard thud. He checked his phone for the time and saw that it was now 6:30 in the morning. Later that day, he found an object that had been inserted and cauterized into his right leg, and experienced a run-in with some men in black suits within 4 days of said abduction. Number 3. Alien births. There are a plethora of cases floating around this World Wide Web related to alien abductions, but this encounter of a 24-year-old Australian woman is something else. Megan Liger married her college friend Andrew Mayer in May of '01. Their marriage was going really well, so they decided, we want to conceive. But despite the couple's best efforts, Megan was unable to do so. So the couple went to see many doctors, who asked her to undergo a lot of medical tests. The results showed that Megan had the body of an extremely old woman, and her reproductive organs were unable to function properly as they were deteriorated due to multiple pregnancies. As per the report, her uterus was as old as that of a 60-year-old woman. Now these reports stunned the couple, but Megan was confident that she had never become pregnant in her lifetime. So they're confused, they don't know what to do next. Now one of her doctors stated that she could maybe get some answers by undergoing a lot of sessions of regressive hypnosis. She's like, yeah, why not, I'll do anything. And under the influence of said hypnosis, she stunned physicians with a remarkable account of her life. She revealed that once while walking through a municipal park, she noticed a UFO hovering above her. She tried to run away from it after it got too close, but suddenly felt herself being lifted up by a beam of light from inside the craft. After that, she felt dizzy and eventually passed out. Later, after regaining consciousness, she realized she was in a total pitch black room, no noise, very silent, which kind of scared her. She screamed and called out for help, but no one came to her aid. Using her sense of touch, Megan realized that she was in a small room with perfectly smooth walls and flooring. A flare of light illuminated the room, and then she saw the shadows of the people for the first time in a while. The shadows were of 2 small extraterrestrial creatures who asked her to get up. They were no taller than Megan's shoulders, with enormous heads, thin arms and legs, and enormous dark eyes. Then she was brought to a room that seemed like a surgical operating theater. After what seemed to be a preliminary medical checkup, the aliens put her in a room that had see-through walls, floors, and ceilings. There were also other abductees, directly located to her right and left, as well as below and above her. After a period of about 2 weeks, her stomach started to expand, and after a little more than a couple of months, Megan gave birth to her first alien spawn. During the process of giving birth, there were a number of different aliens there who stood and examined her as she writhed in front of them. And as soon as her spawn was delivered, he was whisked away from his mother without delay. Megan claims that hybrids seemed quite similar to humans, except that their eyes are much larger. Ignore my big eyes. After some time had passed, the examination in the operating room was carried out once more, and then another pregnancy came after that, and then another, and then another. Apparently this occurred over the course of roughly 4 years. During that time, she gave birth to around 48 offspring. After that, she became infertile, and was no longer of interest to aliens. Hence, she was brought back to Earth and all of her memories of alien abduction were erased. The memories were replaced with the memory that Megan served in the Army under a contract for those 4 years. But the Australian Ministry of Defence, where she had subsequently applied, stated that they never had such an employee, and they considered that Megan was maybe just crazy. Number 2, an abduction in Oregon. Back in 1967, Loretta Robertson was driving to Portland and had pulled over at a rest stop to take a nap when she heard a diesel vehicle pull up next to her. Trust me, you know what a diesel vehicle sounds like. A little later, she heard another one, but this time felt like it was on top of her, and all she could do was just sort of cover her head in horror. There was a pressure on her head and a greenish-white light hit her feet and shocked the heck out of her. And that's, well, when she got beamed up, for lack of a better word. I remember feeling like she was seated on something, but couldn't open her eyes out of fear. She could feel the acceleration of going straight up, but couldn't feel any surroundings and can't remember any smells. She blacked out after that and woke up the next morning in her car and had to pull sticky items off of her skin, especially around her abdomen. There was a round unknown stuck to her stomach that didn't have legs and was the size of a jawbreaker, and when she crushed where it was attached to her skin, redness poured out. Her mouth felt like it was full of gravel, and she had a mysterious hole in her tooth that couldn't be explained by science. Number 1, the end of a relationship. Gramsey witnessed an abduction back in 2006 when he was only 20. His story begins after a dinner with his girlfriend at the time and her mom, grandma, and younger sister. He was on his way out of the house, heading through the kitchen to the front door, when he saw 2 creatures leading the younger sister towards said front door. They were both small in size with long arms and a long neck and wore tight black jumpsuits, and Derek found himself frozen in shock as he watched them walk straight through the wall. There was an additional taller creature with a scaly brown face, wearing a robe with a hood over its head, and apparently looked similar to a lizard. He emerged from the bedroom where the other 2 were, leading the way for the younger sister. After that, his brain lost all memory until the next morning when he woke up in his girlfriend's room. The sister was spotted by neighbors, laying nude and unconscious in the front yard that same night. When he told his girlfriend everything he saw, she let him know that it was a regular occurrence and a family secret, which is why the dad had left the family unit years before. The duo continued to date for a little over a year after the first occurrence, but finally broke up. They did keep in touch for several years, and the strange happenings only got more and more intense. A few weekends ago, the weekend of March 9th to the 10th to be specific, Rock Springs city attorney and longtime UFO investigator Richard Beckwith spotted something strange in the Wyoming sky, unlike anything else he had seen in his career. Thankfully for us, he captured this on camera. Now, what did he say? Well, he said, "I've never seen a UFO before I made this recording. We have the footage with us now, and I'd like for you folks to watch it." To me, it looks like a mix of yellowish, reddish, and orange spacecrafts that are all flying together, and they're all radiating lights. They're definitely flying in a way that doesn't make any logical sense when you consider human technology for aircrafts, unless the military wants to fess up right now about any tech they haven't told us about yet, which not gonna happen. And I'm including drones in my comparison, by the way. I've seen enough of those amateur and professional models of the little guys in action to know that this isn't that. So late in the evening on March 9th, Beckwith received a call from a friend who lived near Green River, about 15 miles southwest of where he was. So he grabbed his camera, his tripod, and what he witnessed once he got there came as a shock. He watched the object pulsating. It was moving rapidly from side to side. Now, Beckwith isn't trying to prove the object was an alien spacecraft, he's just trying to find an explanation. But you know where we stand on this. He has received a few potential leads on social media, but hasn't yet found any evidence as to what it could be. Now, it's time for him to dive into his investigation. He's done the right thing. He requested radar records from the FAA and connected with other witnesses. Gathering this information will help him find a reasonable explanation, or it might help him determine if it's truly a UFO. We do have a quote from him. He spoke to a couple of press outlets. He said that using the locations of the 2 different groups of witnesses, including myself, the angle and the distance between those 2, and the angles between them and the object, and trigonometry, I should be able to pretty easily determine the location and get a good estimate of the size of the object. Right now, I have no idea. Well, when it comes to me, math ain't my strong suit, never has been, so I'm gonna trust him on that front. He's still hunting, and I wish him luck getting those radar records. Look, he did the right thing by asking for them, but I doubt he's gonna get them. He's also been pleading for anybody with more information to email him, and I bet his inbox is already flooded. So, good luck, pal. Time to travel over to the Ukraine for our next video. I mean virtually, folks. That's not somewhere you want to be vacationing anytime soon. I can't spell out why, because YuleTube rules, but I'm sure we're all pretty aware of current world events. So the 406th Battalion captured a UFO on tape with a drone on the front lines over in Ukraine, and the video in question was posted to Reddit about a month ago. User Lively420 described the video as exclusive footage submitted to the frontier conflict from a unit they support showing a UAP over the front lines in the Ukraine. So, Let's watch the video. Yeah, you can see it zooming in on what looks like a flat disk UFO in a gray sky, and that's a pretty typical UFO shape, ergo makes sense to me. User Toru32 was kind enough to decipher the chatter in the video for everybody, so allow me to discuss what was being said. Why can't he fire missiles at us? What do you mean? Holy F. F word. What the F is this? I'm telling you it's UFO for sure. It's standing still. Zoom in more. It's standing still, do you see? Can't see anything on the thermal cameras. Maybe ram it? They couldn't make out the last sentence, but I'm sure you get the idea by this point. Not to sound like a broken record, but if military officials don't know what the bleep they're seeing in the sky, and these are folks trained to recognize aircrafts from all sorts of different ways of the world, I'm leaning once again towards UFO. It should be noted that a lot of these experts are trained at what they call REIS, which is the art of recognizing aircrafts by their shapes, paint schemes, unit insignia, and more. Hyperfixation to the max? Maybe, but it takes a very specific brain to remember all of that. And if something doesn't make sense to that person, being the expert, it falls under unknown. Some folks have tried to discredit this video by saying it looks like a ship in the water, but consider the following. This footage was taken over land, and the pros are using a thermal camera. Ergo, the distortion causing the air over the water temperature shift would be visible. I don't have any other theories, but let me know in the comments if you do. Also, if this is legit, this means that commercial quadcopter drones are able to detect UFOs, and that's pretty huge news. You could potentially blanket an area with a drone swarm, all armed with IR cameras pointed right up. Since drones don't have, meat pilots, they're able to perform maneuvers that would otherwise be impossible to endure the G-forces of with any conventional aircraft, so we could get some close approaches. Okay, imagine this. Somebody reports a sighting, you could have like 30 plus drones in the area in minutes to investigate in a non-hostile manner. I would be foaming at the mouth for that footage and clarity. Like, gimme, gimme, gimme. Here's another Reddit gem, footage from some skydivers. This is definitely a clip where you need to wait it out. Because sure, I was ready to dismiss this one at first. I was like, okay, very obvious balloons in the sky. Hoax hat on, next, click off. But then I was scrolling through the comments and I realized I wasn't supposed to be paying attention to that. I was supposed to wait for the curious little white dotted formation to appear near the folks hanging out in the sky. User Emery X captioned this video by saying, "We're skydivers, so we know it's not us." Second white speck we've seen today, seemingly floating down, wind up high. Odd orbital looking activity around it when zoomed in. Thought maybe stabilization stuff, but the bugs flying around in the video don't have that problem. So right there, that rules out a lot of the obvious debunking possibilities. They mentioned later that they had conferred with the human in the sky, who had also seen the unknown white things, so that's even more confirmation of it being something unknown, ergo a UFO. I think some of the commenters summed up my feelings exactly. If it's not CGI or doctored, I don't know what the bleep that is. The movement of the fast moving white thing around the bigger white thing reminded some folks of the ping pong ball in a cup effect that Dave Fravor described when he first saw the Tic-Tac, and I agree with that. To elaborate, retired Navy Commander David Fravor, I know, I should be formal, was commander of the FA-18F squadron on the Nimitz when he spotted that specific object during a flight off of the coast of Southern California on November 14th of 2004. Him and Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich, who I've talked about a lot of times on this channel, were training with the Nimitz Carrier Strike Group about 100 miles southwest of San Diego. Now at the time, advanced radar on a ship that was part of their training group, the Princeton, detected what operators called multiple anomalous aerial vehicles over the horizon, descending 80,000 feet in less than a second. Fravor and Dietrich diverted to investigate. Fravor was like, "Dude, do you see that thing down there?" And they saw this little white tic-tac looking object that was kind of moving around above the whitewater area. Now during the trainings exercise, both of them each had a weapons system officer in the backseat of the plane. So there was 4 folks in airplanes just watching this thing for about 5 minutes. Fravor was like, "Okay, I'm going in, let's get a closer look." And he described the tic-tac object mirroring his movements. He's like, "It was aware we were there. The object was about the size of the plane, no markings, no wings, no exhaust plumes, and when he tried to cut it off, it accelerated so quickly that it just disappeared." He said it was detected roughly 60 miles away less than a minute later. Now later, he went on record as saying, "I think what we experienced was well beyond the material science and the capabilities that we had at the time, that we have currently, or that we're going to have in the next 10 to 20 years. I think this spotting was similar to that one, and I stand by that statement as well." This is technically both a Reddit and a TikTok post, and while I usually hesitate to use TikTok as any kind of reference with how much videos can be edited on that platform, this seemed legitimate enough for me. User Dylan's mom uploaded this gem, which, sidebar, such a cute username. The caption reads as follows. "On Friday, March 1st of 2024, around 6 p.m., I captured a strange black object moving and changing shape in the sky above Bennington, Vermont. I did use Google Photos to help stabilize the video, and I muted the background noises of all the traffic and my voice. The video quality isn't that great, so I do apologize apologize for that. No other edits have been made though. If anyone has any ideas of what this could be, please feel free to leave a comment. I posted my video on my TikTok account, but I wanted to share it with all of you. And seems innocent enough. So in the video you can see what looks like a typical sunset, and then at first what seems like a speck of dust or a plastic bag in the sky. But then the camera zooms in a smidge and focuses, and you can clearly tell that what we're looking at is some sort of dark flat UFO that's aimed in a way that, well, wouldn't make sense velocity-wise for any kind of human aircraft or drone. Some folks suggested it could be a black contrail, which if you're not familiar with the term, don't worry, neither was I until today. Contrails, which is short for condensation trails or vapor trails, are line-shaped clouds produced by aircraft engine exhaust or changes in air pressure, typically at aircrafts cruising altitudes several miles above Earth's surface. Look, I used to see jets flying in the air all the time growing up, and this was too precise in my opinion to be a contrail. It was too solid and didn't seem to break apart. Also, once again, what human spacecraft leaves black condensation behind? That just doesn't make sense. Alrighty folks, we're gonna end today with a story that I know has been on everybody's minds lately, and that's the monolith that popped up over near Hay Bluff. So last week, a hiker in Wales said he discovered this monolith, and it's kind of similar to those found around the world in 2020. Craig Muir, a builder, discovered the approximately 10-foot tall, I don't know what, during a regular hike, which means he's familiar with the area. Ergo, this wasn't just something left behind, some new discovery. This was something new that landed here on Earth. Originally, he was like, okay, it's a little bizarre. It might be a scientific media research thing collecting rainwater. But then he was like, okay, no, I'm wrong. This is too tall, too strange. What on earth? So he's like, okay, I'm gonna go investigate, which you're very brave to do so. He's like, okay, it's about 10 feet tall, kind of triangular, definitely stainless steel, maybe. At least that's what he knows. He's like, it seems hollow. I guess he knocked on it. And he's like, it seems like it would be pretty light. Which, hey, that all makes sense with what we know about UFOs. The column is similar to the monoliths discovered in a southwest Utah desert back in 2020. And there was also some that were discovered in like California, Texas, Florida, Wisconsin, Romania, and plenty of other places. Now, while the most famous artist later took credit for several of the US-based monoliths, nobody's claimed this one. So I'm betting on the aliens here with their advanced technology and advanced materials.